Hello everyone and welcome to this special event, The Big Questions on Race. My name is Alan Vallance and I'm Chief Executive at the RIBA, coming to you from a virtual Portland Place behind me. Today's event marks the first day of Black History Month. This week is also National Inclusion Week. So to mark that, today's event is also one of a series we're holding every day this week as part of the RIBA's Inclusion by Design Festival. If you haven't been able to attend any of the other events, or you've missed them, or you want to watch them again, or you want to tell somebody else about them so that they can see them, they're all being recorded and can be seen on the RIBA's website at architecture.com from next week. As an organisation, the RIBA is working hard to ensure that architecture is equally open to all, regardless of background or circumstance. Currently, it isn't. We know there are discriminatory barriers preventing talented people from studying, practicing, or even appreciating architecture. And we take our role in breaking down barriers and driving much needed change at pace very seriously. As part of this, we're using our platforms to share the understandings about key issues. Our Inclusion by Design Festival this week is providing an opportunity to learn from global experts and thought leaders on a range of topics, from race and gender equality to social mobility, disability, and LGBTQ+ inclusion. So thank you all for joining today. Whether you're on the panel or not, I encourage you to please join the discussion, share your thoughts and insights, ask questions and make a contribution. We're all here today to learn from each other. I'll now hand over to the RIBA's Race and Ethnicity Executive Champion, Maxine Mckenzie, who is our event host for today. Over to you, Max.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name's Maxine Mckenzie and I'm RIBA's Executive Director of Marketing and Membership Development. Welcome to our online event, The Big Questions on Race, with our guest speaker, John Amaechi OBE. Today, John will be discussing the big questions around modern racism. He will explore the role that senior leaders play in creating an inclusive workplace and profession, and he'll also be taking questions from the audience. For me personally, the last few months have been a wake-up call that we each have to take responsibility for creating change, which is why I volunteered to take on the role of Race and Ethnicity Champion at RIBA. As a mixed race woman from a working class background, and having worked in predominantly middle class white workplaces, it's often felt difficult to speak up on matters of diversity and inclusion in general, and race in particular, partly because it makes other people feel uncomfortable, but also because it goes against our natural inclination to want to fit in and just get on with doing the best job we can. But for someone like me to have reached a position of seniority means I have a voice, and doing the best job I can means being visible and speaking up for myself and for others on the lack of diversity that's been a feature of my career, but something that I wrote off as being just the way things are. I'm pleased to say there's now real momentum at RIBA to tackle issues of racial equity, diversity and inclusion, both within the architecture profession, but also within our own organisation. So to cover some housekeeping for today's event, we're recording this session so that those who can't join us live will be able to access the video and watch afterwards. We hope the technology will work for us today, and if we have any problems, we'll do our best to continue. But if that becomes impossible, we'll contact you all to reschedule. In a moment, John will begin his presentation, and that will be followed by a 25-minute audience Q&A. Please submit any questions using the Q&A function, and John will do his best to get through as many as he can in the time available. Following the Q&A, there will be a session with our panelists who represent different organisations within the architecture sector. Each panelist has a short time to cover what they pledge to do to support racial equity going forward, or share insights on what has worked in their practice or organisation to champion underrepresented ethnic groups. And the event will finish promptly at 2:45. So we're delighted to welcome John to our event today. John is a respected organisational psychologist, a best-selling New York Times author, a sought-after public speaker, executive coach and CEO of APS Ltd. In 2019, John was recognised as one of HR's most influential thinkers by HR magazine. And now over to John for his presentation.
Thank you so much, Maxine. Normally, when people say you're one of HR's thinkers, that makes everybody turn off. So hopefully this will, hopefully you stayed with us. I want this to be a weird and wonderful experience. I think functional friction is really important. Functional discomfort is really important. So It would be ridiculous to start without talking about where we are. 5 months in, one of my day jobs is that I'm the director of the UK's largest NHS trust, and it's been a remarkable, difficult time within the NHS. But for all of us, we have felt the anxiety and stress of being worried for perhaps the first time that the breath of a stranger might kill us, that our own breath might harm somebody we love. And on top of that baseline of anxiety, we've had in the last 12 weeks, should we call it a resurgence of interest? Maybe not a resurgence, maybe just a surge in interest in race and racism. I do not speak for all black people. I'm reliably informed Michelle Obama speaks for all black people. But I speak for some black people, and I'll tell you right now that your black and brown friends, your black and brown colleagues are exhausted right now. It is exhausting to watch somebody be murdered for looking like you. To watch it again and again and again and again and again. To see the comments of people who want to put a caveat there and say if he didn't turn away, if he wasn't wearing a t-shirt, if she wasn't married to a criminal. To listen in polite company as people debate how much your life matters. It takes a toll. And not because black and brown people are weak, but because it's relentless. And as much as each of you here on this call, and I appreciate your presence, many people feel, I feel, sometimes that it's great that there are people now who are awake and aware of the differential experience of so many people, not just black and brown people, but women in this world, those people with disabilities, LGBT community, and on and on and on, and not just protected categories at that. When people are suddenly awake to that, it reminds you that you wish you'd been there 6 months ago. I wish you'd been there 6 years ago. I wish you were there when I was 16 and my sisters and I were defending ourselves from a bunch of white kids trying to beat us up off the bus. I'm glad you're here now. It's really important. I want to create an inclusive culture, not because I'm a warm and fuzzy psychologist. I could give a damn about singing Kumbaya around a campfire. I want to win. I want to thrive in an environment that, as we just look around us, so unpredictable. The world as we knew it, gone. A new unpredictable world full of challenges and opportunities is here if we're willing to grow and adapt. It's on you, each of you. You are the key to this. Any of you with named leadership positions, especially so, you are disproportionately powerful, but each of you will and can have an impact. You can have an impact by making sure that your personal standards matter. Whether you are a named leader or an intern in an organization, your personal standards matter. Whether you're an influencer or you're afraid that you're almost invisible, your personal standards matter. What you stand for matters. The standards you allow around for you matter, no matter your sphere of influence. I talk to a lot of people and they tell me that culture is so hard to define. It's impossible to define. And that's never been true. Culture is not hard to define. You can define it this way. Culture is defined by the worst behavior tolerated. Whether we're talking about RIBA, whether you're talking about the other firms and organizations that are represented here in the audience, or if we're just talking about society as a whole, it's defined by the worst behavior tolerated. And maybe that's the place we need to start. and say, what does that mean of my team? What does that mean of my business unit? What does it mean of my organization? What indeed does it mean of our society if it is defined by the worst behavior we tolerate? We have work to do, I think, is what we'd say. Maybe that's the understatement of the century. This is a big question on race. I'm going to talk about things that many people find challenging, things like systemic bias. But really, I want to talk about how you make a difference. But before I do that, I just want to talk about ambition. Because most organizational strategies, and you know, for context, the work that I do is mostly with organizations, but most organizational strategies, when it comes to inclusion, they lack a context for their ambition. So let me give you some. It has been 107 years since Emily Davison was killed by King George V's horse as she attempted to bring women equal rights. The World Economic Forum suggests that it may take another 200 years for economic gender parity, and that number has variously slipped, gone further away in the last decade. Black people have been in the United Kingdom for 1800 years, since Roman times. Thank you, David Olusoga. It's been 212 years since the Abolition of Slave Trade Act, before which, by the way, Britain and Portugal were responsible for about 70% of Africans transported into slavery. Britain alone for shipping about 3.1 million Africans. And just for context, we shipped 3.1 million, only about 2.7 million arrived. So when we speak of an ambition for equity, it doesn't sit in the context of your tenure as leader. It doesn't sit in the context of the amount of time before you decide to look for another role. It doesn't sit in the context of last year and the year before and Me Too awareness, or in the last 12 weeks when the world suddenly noticed that racism still exists. It sits in the context of centuries of inequality. When one has not eaten for a month, all the while watching others gorge themselves, being asked to wait for even 10 minutes is an indignity. Urgency in the context of equality is an economic, social, and if you really need it, a moral justice imperative. It's not positive action, because that would require the presence of a meritocracy. If in your head you're thinking Marxist, please understand, you may not know what that means, because I'm not Marxist. But if in your organization anybody says it matters who you know, then your organization is not a meritocracy. If in your organization sponsorship by a senior person is how you get ahead, then your organization is not a meritocracy. This is not an insult, it's just a fact. And it's really important when you're doing the kind of work we're talking about today, because part of the challenge we face from people when we are trying to make changes to improve equity is the idea that what we are doing is giving stuff to Black and brown people, to wheelchair users, to the LGBTQ, to women. And that's not what's happening. It's not a meritocracy. That does not mean the people in this room who have made it and achieved great success have not earned it. It does not mean you are not driven and ambitious and brilliant. It simply means that there are other people who are driven, ambitious and brilliant and made just as good a plan as you. And they cannot, could not, and did not make it where you made it. The work we're doing is to make the world more meritocratic in the same way that Black Lives Matter exists so that all lives matter might be true. Because right now it isn't true. The pace of change needs to be rethought. 10 to 15 years is an unacceptable timescale for change, not just in the context of any one lifetime, but in the context of centuries of inequality. Change at all practical speed. I've heard boards tell me that. Boards love the supertanker analogy, right? Our organization is so big, we're a supertanker. It takes it. I've got news for you. Supertankers don't take 10 to 15 years to turn. More than that, because my organization is incredibly geeky, one of my colleagues did their doctoral dissertation on murmurations. That is the groups, millions often, of starlings that you will have seen if you're lucky enough. And they move, and the way they move is remarkable, right? You see them in the sky, taking all kinds of shapes to avoid predation and to find the best food. That's an agile million bird group, multi-million bird group. They don't move like a supertanker because they'd die if they did. They'd starve if they did. Do you know how many birds have to communicate with each other clearly and consistently for that mass, for that murmuration to move that way? 4. Just 4. The 4 closest birds to each other need to talk, communicate always. If your organization is moving like a supertanker, it's because you don't talk to each other in a way that's clear, and your direction is not quite as well intentioned, perhaps, as it might be. If we want to make a difference, we have to understand some things, and some of these things are really difficult. One of them is the idea of systemic bias. Systemic racism in this particular case, but systemic bias broadly. It's really hard for people because people imagine if I'm talking about systemic racism, that must mean that everybody in that system is racist, and that's not the case. And you know what? More than that, it's irrelevant. It's literally irrelevant. Systemic bias occurs not always out of malice, but out of thoughtlessness. It occurs because when a system is derived or created, it's created with one type of person in mind. Think of who was in mind when the RIBA came to be. Was it women? Think carefully, more sophisticated. Was it actually all men? Because it wasn't. So any system that's designed for one type of person will innately cause more friction for people who it wasn't designed for, who weren't in mind when it was created. And the more different you get away from the prototype of that person who was in mind, the more friction you will experience. A few years ago, there was this amazing story about a racist soap dispenser and a racist hand dryer. We're not quite at the stage where technology can be overtly racist, though AI is doing a pretty good job. I've used some of these things. Correction, I've attempted to use some of these. They're in Marriott hotels. They're in the Google offices. They're in 3 or 4 of the towers in Canary Wharf. It is highly unlikely that a group of white engineers sat in a clean room designing some new tech, twirling their evil mustaches, saying, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a soap dispenser that forces black people to leave the bathroom with dirty hands. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a hand dryer that forces black people to leave the bathroom with wet hands. That's not what happened. Or at least, I very much doubt that's what happened. What happened was they put it through testing. They tested it on people they knew. They then put it through independent testing, and they tested it on the consumer market. They didn't hate black people when they created it. They just didn't think about black people at all. So when you put your hands underneath that, the sensor doesn't recognize you, as if you don't even exist. This is systemic racism. Don't waste your time spinning your wheels about whether it's malice or thoughtlessness, because in the world of inclusion, thoughtlessness is as good as malice. We love the idea in our organizations that intent matters, but it doesn't. I broke someone's nose dancing once. It was New Year's Eve. It was the Jackson 5, Can You Feel It? I was in the middle of the dance floor with my sister, her dreadlocks flying all over the place. It was amazing for about 20 seconds. Before I'm being punched on the arm by my sister and dragged off the dance floor. Eventually she points in the middle of the dance floor and there's a young man on his knees. And I realize I didn't even feel it. And I looked at him and I had broken his nose, and I don't mean a little bit, I mean all of it. There weren't pieces, there were crumbs. I walked up to him because, like all of you listening, like all of you here, we know that there are magic words we can tell people when we wound them unintentionally. And I walked up to him, and in the midst of all this noise, I yelled in his ear, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it." I'll never forget the look on his face as he peeled his hands away and blood spurted everywhere. And I realized, perhaps for the first time, that intent doesn't matter. Impact matters. I wounded him as surely as if I'd wandered straight up to him and punched him in the face. This is the world we live in. Our intent cannot protect us from the wounding that we commit. And if you're interested in being inclusive and creating an inclusive environment, it's not enough to wound people without meaning it. It's only enough to be so vigilant that you never wound people. You've got to state your position. People who want to be allies on this call, state your position. What do you stand for? We often take it for granted. People know what I stand for. But sometimes you just have to keep saying it and saying it and saying, because we live, you may not have noticed, in a slightly crazy world where people stand for some pretty dubious stuff right there in public now. So we have to state what we stand for unequivocally. If racism is here, here is a fence, and I am here on the other side of that fence. If misogyny is here, then I am here. Homophobia, Islamophobia, ableism, whatever the incivility, there is a fence, and I stand opposed. Proactively, vehemently opposed. I do not sit dangling my foot lazily in misogyny. Because there are some issues in this world for which there are not good people on both sides. Let the world know what you stand for. If someone calls you politically correct, I fail to understand the insult. Let the world know what you stand for, and then make sure that people who would stand with you stand for that too. We are defined by the people we hang around with. People think that's only true of black kids on street corners, but it's actually true of everybody. Love is unconditional, but proximity is not. You've got a racist, homophobic, Islamophobic uncle. I fear people do. I do. They get a bad Christmas present, but they don't get to break bread with me. Because the people I surround myself with tell you something about what I stand for, and I couldn't bear that compromise. For organizations, for leaders of organizations, understand the same is true for you. That person who's incredibly talented, but also is not congruent with your values, their existence in your organization makes a lie of your suggestions of equality and your values mattering and your purpose mattering. Because your organization is defined, your culture is defined by the worst behavior you tolerate. We've got to talk about race more often, and I know some of you will be thinking, I've done nothing but. And you haven't. You've probably been listening to a lot about race and not necessarily talking about it, but even if you have, what kind of person is tired of talking about race after 12 weeks? I can reassure you that if you're tired of talking about race after 12 weeks, you are part of the problem. I understand the impetus, right? I'm a little tired of being a professional black person instead of a professional performance psychologist. But needs must, and the slight inconvenience to my title is worth it if I can help create a little more equity for the people who have less, especially given my deep privilege. I want to talk to you a little bit about a couple of things that we need to be careful of. If you want to make a difference in your organizations and in this society, we have to be better at spotting incivility than we have been. And that's because whilst there are still people in America on college campuses doing Nazi salutes, and there are still people right by my house in Trafalgar Square doing similar, most of what we experience in our workplaces that causes the most damage to women and people with disabilities and anybody who's not the norm that that organization was designed for is really sophisticated. We have done a good job of eradicating the people who walk through the halls yelling the N-word. We've not done such a good job with the people who still ask, where are you really from? This is what we have to look at. We have to be more clever. Some of the ways that people are doing this now are things like whataboutery. I hope you've heard of whataboutery. That you'll have experienced it if you are one of those people who talks about race at all in the last few weeks. Somebody will have caught you on a chat, on a video chat before it really gets going and anybody's there, or maybe they've asked to stay on afterwards. And they'll lean into the camera like this. They'll definitely tilt their head because what they're saying is truly very earnest. And then they'll look at you and they'll say, you keep talking about race, but what about women? What about the Asians? What about the LGBT community? What about our colleagues with disabilities? And then they lean back because they've said something truly profound. Just know this is toxic. This is to be swatted away. Pseudo-intellectual nonsense. You'll note that these people never have talked to you about women, Asian colleagues, LGBT people, or people with disabilities ever before, because they don't care about them. They just want you to stop talking about race. We've got to be eloquent in our ability to bat away this kind of sophisticated sophistry. We have to embrace the wins. We have to embrace the things that we've done wrong, and we all do them wrong. You'll meet people who call themselves woke who'll tell you they never have. I'm not one of them. I've made a lot of mistakes. My mum was a doctor. My hospital, most of our doctors are women. I know women can be doctors, doctors can be women. And yet the other day, when I was dealing with a disciplinary issue, that's one of my roles on the board. I think it's just because I'm 6'9". And I was talking to a colleague about it, and it was an eminent surgeon who was misbehaving. And so I wanted to know a bit more, and I said, so what's his name? And there it was. There it was. If we're not super vigilant, that cognitive programming in our head that lets us know every day that women are emotional and manipulative and weak, that lets us know every day that black people are criminal and stupid. It'll take over. So we've got to embrace that wince to make a difference. I think I have a video that I want to show you, but I'm not sure where I am for time, so I'm going to look for somebody to nod at me, Maxine, and tell me I should shut up, or if I can play the video. If I can play the video, I'm going to play the video, because I think this is going to wound your souls a little bit, and that's important. I told you there's some functional discomfort, and here comes some of it. In the 1940s, we found out that there is this thing, cognitive programming. A husband and wife team of psychologists came up with a test to see how early do we know about race. And we found out that by the age of 4, we know the difference between white and black. And by the age of 4, we know that one of those things is good and one of those things is bad. And I'm going to play this for you because part of systemic bias is not just the systems that we built, but also the fact that we default to this programming if we're not super cautious. And so being vigilant and knowing this will make a huge difference. I'll do this and then I will take your questions.
Quale bambola è bianca? Quale bambola è nera? Qual è quella bella? Qual è quella brutta? E qual è quella buona? Quale è cattiva? Quale è buona? Perché è buona?
Perché ha gli occhi celesti.
Quale è cattiva? Perché è cattiva?
Perché è tutto nero.
E qual è la bambola che ti somiglia di più?
There we go. Sorry, it took a second to get rid of that. So there's the doll test. Kenneth and Mamie Clark, 1940. They did that research. We've known since then. Amazing, really. The way the little girl coos at the very beginning. And then you watch in real time as young people shrink and shrink and shrink. Even the little boy who knows that black can be beautiful, knows that black is bad. And at the end, each of them, and did you notice the racial diversity? Not just African heritage and Caribbean heritage, but what we would in the UK certainly call Asian children and mixed race or mixed heritage children as well. Who pointed at the doll that looks like them that's ugly and bad. Because racism has never been about where you come from. It's about the color of your skin. This is what we fight. We all have this. Every single person on this call, we have this racial programming in the same way we have that gender programming. We have programming about sexualities that is damaging. This is all in there. And people think the job of allyship, the job of those who want to create inclusive environments, is to get rid of the programming, and it's not. It is to be forever vigilant. To say that spending the energy required to never let yourself default to that programming, that is the role of allies. That is what we do to make a difference. So I'm going to see if I've got a few questions. And it's going to start shortly, but I don't have anything at the moment, which is great. So unless I do, Antoinette, you moderate and let me know, and I'll happily do it.
Yes, you do, John. You have 23 questions.
Okay, I'm looking at the wrong one. That's why.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Now I'm looking at the right one. Sorry, technology deficient for a second there. We are looking to start. Hi, John. It's Dara. We're looking to start a Black, Asian, and minority ethnic. May not be the best title. ERG and our company, have you any advice how to get senior leaders engaged before the launch date? I'm a little incredulous that at this, I mean, if senior leaders aren't engaged in this at this state, at this point, I'm incredulous. The thing to do is you've got to help people understand about the clumsy space, right? You've got to help, especially because I would imagine if they're senior, they are men and white, and if you want them to be involved in networks that are not about white men, you have to help them understand that this may be uncomfortable, but you'll be fine. I've got you. You're not going to knock anything over. I'll be there. You've got to help them understand that. And I know that seems overly pampering, but that's what we have to do. You have to help people realize that learning is going to be uncomfortable, but not painful, and that comfort will be returned. Help them understand what the benefit is to them and the organization. I think that's what we have to do. Incredible. I'm sorry that you've not got more effusive support at this point. How important do you think it is for RIBA, for RIBA to, oh, it's gone now. There we go. How important do you think it is for the RIBA from now on to nominate architects for regional, national architectural awards only if it is proven that their practices have actively incorporated anti-racist policies in their practice? So I think being anti-racist is kind of a baseline position for everybody. I think in terms of having the policies, that would seem to me like a smart thing to do. I don't know if that necessarily means that an environment will be more inclusive, because don't forget, anti-racist is kind of it's a compliance baseline. It's not really the kind of, whilst it's the gold standard of compliance, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will have more black people or black people, because it just means it's a low baseline, I think. How do you to nominate architects? I don't know, because I've got no experience with this kind of award stuff, but to me, there's probably other criteria that are required of these organizations to qualify for an award, and I think they should have to qualify on the basis of things like being anti-racist. That should just be standard. Anti-misogynist, standard. Anti-homophobic, standard. And if you don't have policies that meet that standard, you shouldn't be allowed to go for awards, I don't think. No. It's a compliance thing to me. It's not even really the highest of high bars. I used to think that all that I needed, all that any person of color asked for, is an equal chance and equal shot at success. As I've matured and I've been working in the construction industry for the past 20 years, I realized that it's the fear of invisibility. Yeah, it's a weird dichotomy with black and brown people, that you fear invisibility, and at the same time, you also know that your visibility can come with lots of weird associations that make your life much more difficult. Again, I mean, you can't tell because I'm in a tiny box, but I'm 6'9" and 23 stone and black. I'm like the dictionary definition of a super predator. I don't fear being invisible. It crushes my soul when people cross the street when I walk towards them. It hurts me and insults me when I stand in lifts with men who put their hand on their wallet, and women who take their bag from the shoulder closest to me and put it on the shoulder furthest away. It irritates the mess out of me when that happens. And it wounds me. But it irritates me because if I'm in a lift in Canary Wharf with you and we're going to go 30 floors in a metal tin box, trust me, if I wanted your wallet, I'd have your wallet. Sorry, I digress. Thank you so much for your time. See, this is the kind of stuff that gets me in trouble. Thank you so much for your time today. What advice would you give? I don't want your wallet. What advice would you give to those who want their colleagues to become more active in the pursuit of improved racial literacy and racial equality, but have witnessed some of the colleagues being exasperated by the call for institutions to address their lack of? Yeah, again, what advice can you give to combat the compassion fatigue that is happening regardless of these issues? So, can I just be perfectly frank? If your compassion is running out after 12 weeks, that's not good person territory. Your black colleagues are not an advert for £3 a month for drinking water in Africa. They're the people who inhabit your workspace, who contribute to your productivity, who make what you do more brilliant, just as you do. When do we get to the point where there's a shelf life for that? I get the fact that you've got people, but I think we need to be really clear with them that if you want to stop having this be an issue on top of mind, then we have to create a meritocratic organization, and that might take a little longer than 12 weeks. There are women in this room, regardless of your color, who some of the ideas who are being addressed right now as if gender equity is a done deal because we measure it. There are people with disabilities in this virtual room with us who have never declared them to their organization because they know that it will disenfranchise them, reduce their opportunity. There's LGBT people who are out all through college, who are out with all their friends and not at work for fear of the harm that it will do to them. In the context of this, it is churlish indeed for anybody to have compassion fatigue. There are Asian people on this call right now who aren't called by their proper first name. Can I just call you Sam? Can I just call you Al? Hell, my name isn't even John. My mother changed my name when I was 11 because white people think that Amaechi is Italian. White people think Italians are white. John Amaechi is a white Italian. Dr. John Amaechi is a learned white Italian. Dr. John Amaechi OBE is a learned and honored white Italian, and my CV sails through. And 3 weeks ago, I talked to somebody on the phone. I know we don't do that anymore. And then I had a VC with them, a video call with them, and we sat for about 60 seconds looking and smiling at each other before they looked at me, leant into the camera, head tilted slightly to the side, and said, "When's John coming?" In the context of lives that are defined by race, defined by an impairment or disability, defined by their treatment at the hands of the opposite gender, compassion fatigue seems selfish. Let me see. If you don't associate and spend time with people who don't share your views, the racist, misogynist uncle, then how do they learn that their views are not acceptable in society? In the same way, so I've published it, sorry, I'm doing this slowly. In the same way, so it's not that I don't think you should engage, right? I think everybody should have a chance to engage. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to look, and I get to look at the beautiful faces of the other people, panelists you're going to talk to, and I might say, you know, Maxine, yeah, we'll have a conversation. I'll help you understand this. And if Maxine rejects that, then I might even give it one more go. But then if that's rejected, then I have to say, Maxine and I can't hang. And if finding yourself exorcised, removed from the presence of people who might enrich your life doesn't give you a message, then perhaps you're never going to learn. What we need is more of that kind of public sanction. At the moment, it appears to me you are more likely to be publicly shamed and sanctioned for expressing the belief that, I don't know, Elvis is still alive, than you are by expressing a racist or misogynist belief in a sophisticated way. We need to have at least the same amount of, whoa, I'm staying away from you, as we have for somebody who thinks they chat with Elvis, as somebody who says stuff that's sophisticated but bigoted. Let me see, here we go. If I ask questions about discrimination or how you were treated at your last job in an interview, what's the best way to go about this, especially as an African still relatively new in the healthcare industry? So if I ask questions, let me publish, if I ask questions about discrimination or how you were treated in your last job, how do you ask about that? I'm not sure. Again, this is where my HR knowledge fails me, despite being an influencer apparently in that space. I don't know that you can expect to get an honest answer from people. I still find, and this is a shame, that things like Glassdoor, Roll on Friday, I'm sure there's equivalents for different sectors. These websites, you can't take everything that's put on there as fact, but I think it's still one of the ways that you have to check, and you have to look into your network. Has anybody worked with this organization? How was that experience? I think that's what we have to do. We have to keep checking And then we have to vote with our feet. If you are a brilliant person, and this is not just about minorities, by the way, any of you that are brilliant people, you've got to vote with your feet. Don't work for an organization that would grant you a good wage if they violate your personal principles. And I know that that's easy for me to say, right? Of course, it's easy for you to say. But that's how change happens. My organization did an RFP, request for proposal meeting with a big organization. They had 15 people on the call. Apparently there's not much to do nowadays. And we had 6 of my team on, and they started by talking to me about how, look, we're doing this race fluency thing, and I need you to help us, potentially, your organization. Can you help us? Because what we're finding is that the coloreds, they aren't doing a very good job. Why can't they do as good a job as the Asians? They just keep quiet and assimilate. Everybody on my side turn the camera off, because that's what we do when there's incivility with clients. So 6 people's cameras went off, and then somebody looks at me and says, oh, it seems like all your cameras are off. I said, yeah, because we don't call people colored. The last time somebody said that, it was 1970. It was my granddad. It was 1970. We don't do that anymore, and we don't talk about assimilation, and we don't talk about keeping quiet. None of these things are right. And we didn't win that RFP, not surprisingly. But we have to vote with our feet if we really think something is important. How important do I think, oh boy, how important do I think the outcome of the US election is? We need you. Not one of you and not all of us together are as powerful as the President of the United States. But we need you, because the problems that have been generated in the last 3 years, or at least exacerbated, will not go away with Joe Biden or anybody else. We need you. We need you to be like the apocryphal story of Louis Pasteur, where he put his petri dish on the sideboard and a speck of penicillin dropped, and around it everything was clear. That's what we need from you. You can't control the world, maybe you can't control your own office, but maybe you can control the fact that the people who sit next to you know what you stand for and will behave in accordance with that. Maybe you have a bit more influence as the CEO of an organization, and you can say, actually, this is what we're going to stand for, and to be a part of this organization, you will behave accordingly. I'm a psychologist and I'm really interested in mindset change, but we can't control what people think. But I've got news for you. Never once in my life have I been wounded by a racist thought. In every single case, I am wounded by the act. And as leaders in organizations, as colleagues, we can change that. We can do that. And I'm going to keep talking until somebody says shut up. So here we go. Let me think. That was my way of saying I don't want to talk about Donald Trump, and I'm afraid that he'll win again. Thank you for showing the doll test. I experienced this when I brought my caramel skinned, oh lovely, daughter to her first, bought her first doll. She honestly said, "Mummy, the black doll is ugly." My heart sunk. I bought the white doll then, but that was a big eye opener. Who should be the voice and face of change in an organization when it comes to race? The most knowledgeable person. Change is a science. Many people are rushing to talk to black people, imagining that all black people are experts in organizational change. I am, but I had to learn that. It was not intrinsically inside of me at the beginning. Black people are experts in their own experience, and they're really good at that. They can add insights, but the person who should lead change is the person with the influence, with the eloquence, with the education, with the willingness to expend the energy to do that, and they should do it by amplifying the voices of people who are regularly unheard. Many black people will feel that when incivility occurs, the best that they can do is whisper, "That's not right." The person who leads is the person who hears that and then yells because of their privilege. They can, at the top of their voice, "That's not right." I'm a black man, I'm 6'9", and I'm 23 stone, and I haven't yelled in 30 years because I cannot. The earth would shake and I would be arrested. So sometimes I walk down the street and men cover their wallet and women put their bags on the other shoulder and police follow me around, and I'm desperate for the person who says, "That's not right," because their white skin will allow it. Don't lead instead of black people, but use your privilege when you can. How do you handle the conversations about race and anti-racism that begin to get aggressive and ineffective? Yeah, welcome to my world. I did a Talk Sport interview yesterday that made me want to just gouge my eyes out with a spoon. I hear your pain. So the thing that I'm going to encourage this approach, and it's going to be really hard. When you have an interaction, before it starts to get fractious, just assume good intent. Now, I know for many of you, you will know that the intent of whatever's happened before is not good, but if you assume that they're a jerk, your interaction will go south and quickly. Assume good intent. Put that smile on. Take a breath. And then use 3 C's: courtesy, curiosity, clarity, and that's how you do it. Somebody's reached out once again for your black colleague's hair. And you say to them, "Oh, you may not know, but actually touching women's hair generally is kind of frowned upon in the workplace, and touching black women's hair especially is really racist and insulting. It's a microaggression, and I can explain that at some point, but it's not really small, it's horrible for the person." And you stay calm. You're really clear and you're courteous, you're a little bit curious, and then you're clear. That can't happen. We don't do that here. Their response should be mortified. They are mortified. "Oh my goodness, I can't believe I did that. I know better. I know better. This is not who I am." And when that happens, you just walk with them. You ease them down. You don't tell them they've not done wrong, because touching black women's hair is not okay. And I know that all the black women in here don't need me to say that, but boy, many of you on this call will not realize just how many times people have attempted to touch their hair this week, never mind this month. If their response is anger, then you know they knew what they were doing. If you're outraged at being called out, if you're rageful at that, it means you screwed up. In my team, we call it the greens in the teeth rule. If any of you ever go to a family gathering at a holiday time and one of your relatives has got like a big chunk of broccoli in their teeth, I have big gaps in my teeth, so for me it'd be like a chicken wing. But if they ever have like a massive piece of green in their teeth, you know that that's the person that nobody loves. Because every single person has decided that the slight discomfort of telling them that they've got a piece of broccoli in their teeth is more important to them than that person not being humiliated in front of everybody. And that's what we can do when we start to help our colleagues, to educate our colleagues. We help them understand that what we're doing is stopping them from embarrassing themselves in front of everybody, and potentially, in this day and age, putting their job at risk. That's what colleagues do. Am I to go on for? Yes, good. All right. Are you optimistic? Are you optimistic about a better future? Does 2020 feel like a turning point in terms of understanding about race and racism? I am old enough to remember Rodney King. 1991. I was in America, actually. I'd gone over there And I remember watching it. Somebody captured it on grainy footage. And I remember the newscasters, and I remember how elated I was because I was a naive idiot. I was elated because the newscasters, they were saying everything will change. There is no way this video can exist and the world not change. That was 1991. And the truth is that for even the most woke of us on this call, we've forgotten the names of all those dead bodies, especially the women. Now we have George Floyd, and even since George Floyd. So can everything change? You tell me. You leave this call right now, your opportunity will instantly emerge to choose the side of the fence or to straddle. The opportunity will instantly emerge for you to say, this is what I stand for, and that's unacceptable. If you do that, if you inoculate the environment around you, whether it be small or an entire organization, then there is hope. If not, I will die and racism will be a virulent virus on this earth still. One more maybe? See if I can find one to pick up the tempo a little bit. Is it correct, useful, problematic to say a lot of what is wrong with the world is caused by rich white men? It is not useful, and regardless of its truth, it's not useful. One of the things that diversity practitioners did, and I am not a diversity practitioner, we will fight if you ever call me one of those. One of the things that it's done is that we created this idea that there's this beautiful rainbow of diversity with black people, people in wheel. It's the Benetton ad from 1990s, right? There's a black, a white, a wheelchair, a gay. Ta-da! That's the diversity. And then there's white men, cisgendered white men who are the enemy over here. And that's not the case. It's so reductive and stupid. Of course, white men have most of the power, but having most of the power doesn't necessarily make you evil. Misusing your power or abdicating the responsibility to use your power, that makes you evil. And on that front, I can think of white men and white women. I can think of black men and black women who have had opportunities to make change and chose not to. It happens to be that the preponderance of people with power are white. But I have seen many of them attempt to make a difference now. And I would have them on our side today, even as I wish they'd been there 12 weeks ago, 6 months ago, 6 years ago, and when I was 16 and being beaten up off the bus. Thank you, everybody.
Wow, thank you, John. And on behalf of RIBA and the audience, I'd like to thank you for that very, very powerful and thought-provoking presentation. If you're tired of talking about race after 12 weeks, you're part of the problem. Love is unconditional, but proximity is not. Intent doesn't matter, impact matters. They're just three of the many things that have struck a chord with me. Thanks again. So now on to our panel session. Just a reminder that each panelist has 2 minutes to cover what they pledge to do to support racial equity or share what's worked in their organisation to champion underrepresented ethnic groups. And today's panellists are Alan Valance, who will be making RIBA's ethnicity pledge, Caroline Dove, partner at HTA Design, making a practice pledge, Donna Walker, founder and director of Built by Us, Angela Dapper, making a practice pledge on behalf of Grimshaw Architects, Colleen Lawrence, student and artist, Maria Wegner, founder of Real Estate Women, Charlotte Sword, senior partner, Fosters and Partners, and Elaine Banton, who's a barrister specialising in employment and discrimination law. So over to Alan Valance for the first panelist discussion.
Thanks, Max, and thanks to John as well. At the RIBA, we are committed to dismantling discriminatory barriers which prevent talented people from studying, from practicing or even appreciating architecture, as I mentioned before. Look, we know we've got to work a lot harder and we need to lead by example to support talent and equity. And we also know that we've got to draw on the expertise and the experiences of a much more diverse workforce at the RIBA and to make sure that everybody feels like they can belong. We know that we've got to increase representation at the executive level, at the director level, at senior employee levels, and also at trustee level at the RIBA, and that we've got to kickstart and support a sustainable pipeline of talent. So in addition to doing things like gathering data so we can be more informed, leadership development, we're going to make sure that every recruitment we make is made from a list of candidates which includes underrepresented groups. And wherever we can support the recruitment of underrepresented talent in the architecture profession, we will. So, for example, we're adding a new section to the RIBA's jobs board, which will showcase students from Black, Asian and other underrepresented groups who are looking for job placements. We're reviewing all of our assets, including our listed building at 66 Portland Place in London, which is the image behind me, and the collection items of the RIBA to make sure that they reflect our commitment to equity. And we're also going to be focusing on support for the architecture profession itself, including the need to drive diversity at the local level. So we're going to make additional funding available through the RIBA's Local Initiative Fund, which is for outreach initiatives that support inclusion. And we're going to continue to use our platforms like we're doing today to raise the profile and share understanding around issues of equity, inclusion and diversity. Now, as the Chief Executive of the RIBA, I take my own responsibilities extremely seriously, and I'm pledging I can do everything I can to drive change. But hey, talk's cheap really, isn't it? Yeah, but talk is important. But more important than that is the action that we take. So the action that you take, but most importantly for me, the action that I take. Yes, I am in a privileged position. I am a middle-aged white man, British born, but Australian reared. I'm also a chief executive and I lead and I direct the resources of the RIBA. And it's my actions and the actions of the team that I lead and those considerable resources that can start to make a real difference. So if you don't yet believe what I'm saying, that's okay. Judge me, judge my colleagues and judge the RIBA by what we start doing right here, right now. Thanks, Max.
Okay, thank you, Alan. And we're moving on to our next panelist. Bear with me. Our next panelist is Caroline Dove. Caroline, you're on mute.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about our pledges and commitments at HGA. I'm one of the partners and I'm also responsible for HR at strategic level, and we've had an amazing year, perhaps an upheaval, rethinking quite a bit about how we do things, prompted by COVID, but also prompted by events stimulating the debate around Black Lives Matter. So while we've had an active group at HGA for some years of diversity and inclusion, and with many successful panel discussions and other activities, it was the catalyst of Black Lives Matter that inspired us to think differently about race and commit to action. We have a diverse, multidisciplinary design practice, and we've been working with Stephen Lawrence Trust, charitable trust, for some years, recruiting Part 1 and Part 2 students through them, as well as giving bursaries and organising fundraising events. And as a result, this year we have more Black architectural assistants and architects at HGA than ever before. However, we realised that while we talked a lot about equality, diversity and inclusion, we didn't really talk specifically about race. And this has led to the formation of BLACC, the Black Afro-Caribbean Collective, and we also asked staff for views in our race diversity survey. This week, we sent all our staff a special edition of our newsletter, The Neighbourhood, this month focusing on what we're doing about Black Lives Matter. We've shared some of the feedback from our survey, which asked for leadership training and open discussion, role models, mentoring and support for young Black staff, an increase in Black staff at senior level, and opportunities to engage with and inspire young people still at school. Later this month, we're holding inclusive leadership workshops for all our senior staff and race awareness for all staff, led by Donna Walker, who you'll hear from in a moment, which we're really looking forward to. We've shared details of book lists, Black History events, We'll Wear Red on the 16th of October and much more. And looking beyond, through our Beyond Boundaries initiative, we're working with young people in Newham to design and build a peace garden. We know there's lots to do to make a real change in and beyond HGA, but we feel we're off to a good start. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Donna Walker, and I'm the CEO and founder of something called Built by Us. And Built by Us is a social enterprise. I'm actually an architect by training, having worked in practice for many years and obviously studied and qualified in architecture. Built by Us came about because I was tired of seeing wasted talent. I could see so many amazing individuals coming through to study, wanting to progress, wanting to learn, wanting to reach leadership positions, but that wasn't always possible. And that's where Built by Us has come from. And there are two ways that we really address making change for the industry. So we support individuals, and that's through mentoring, looking at things like attraction and career progression, but also helping potential founders of businesses as well, which is a piece of work that I'm particularly excited about. The other work that we do is working with forward-thinking organisations who are looking at exploring and driving inclusion and fostering change for the industry. It's so important that we drive the opportunity for being inclusive leaders for this sector, to improve management and leadership so that we can foster change and that everybody can thrive and learn. And there's a quote that frames everything I do, which I hope will also inspire you, and it's by James Baldwin. The place in which I fit will not exist until I make it. That drives everything we do. I hope it helps you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Angela Dapper. I'm from Grimshaw Architects. We are a large practice, and as a large practice, we have a responsibility, because we have impact, we have a responsibility to our staff and our profession. We have put together 3 key pledges that I want to talk through now. We've just put them in place, and part of it is because there is a momentum that's been created by Black Lives Matter, and I think it's important to take advantage of this momentum, but it's also important that we put in meaningful change. So we have taken our time with this to make sure we're putting in actions and pledges that will create change over time and hold ourselves to account. We've created these pledges with our senior management team, because it's important they're led from the top, with our diversity group, with our HR team, and with MEGA, which is our multi-ethnicity group and allies, which has a powerful name and a powerful ambition. So it's led from the top and driven from the bottom, so it's throughout. Because for us, it's not just about the strategy, but it's about the culture. So our 3 pledges are: 1, to measure. We're committing to collect information and make sure of our status quo so we can understand and challenge our status quo. We will then use that information to disaggregate the information into ethnicity groups and leadership areas to make sure we can challenge on different levels. And this will help guide our ambitions. Our number 2 pledge is to set goals. We aspire to reflect the communities we work in. And that is in our different international bases. So we reflect the communities that we're working out of. We aim to achieve this improvement through our recruitment processes, through raising our external profile as an inclusive practice, and by creating an inclusive environment for our staff to support them through their career progression, through mentoring, coaching, role models, and advocacy. But again, we're using our measuring to just make sure that we're looking at barriers for progression, but also reviewing it in a wider cultural sense by having open discussions. Number 3, our commitment is to support the wider industry, because we know that we have diversity in the industry, but we need to broaden this out to make sure we have a pipeline of talent. And we're doing this through mentoring students from diverse backgrounds, both secondary and university students, creating work experience opportunities and sponsoring students throughout their studies. We know that having systems in place is really important, but it's our culture at Grimshaw that we're most proud of. And by supporting our staff and making sure we have an open and honest environment and a safe space for conversation and those difficult discussions for everyone to feel at home. It's our culture that will ensure that we have the truly inclusive practice that we aspire to. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Colleen Lawrence and I am a Part 1 architectural assistant, recently made redundant. I think as an aspiring architect, it's a little bit more difficult for me to come up with a specific pledge. But one thing that I do want to say that it's important as young architects for us to continue to market ourselves. I think a lot of the times it becomes easy to be complacent and to fit into an architecture firm because of maybe their ranking or their reputation, and maybe still feel uncomfortable or still have experiences where you feel racially profiled or you feel discriminated against. And I think it's important as young architects and young architects of ethnic minorities to continue to market yourself. And by that I mean when applying for jobs and, you know, when using social media, because young people use social media a lot, it's important to speak up about these topics, and more importantly, when going for interviews, when in the workplace, to use your voice and not assume that because you are younger or because you're a Part 1 or a Part 2 that your voice is not being heard. I think it's important for you to continue market yourselves. I think it's also important to find mentors. One thing that I'm learning a lot is that there are lots of people in senior positions who are willing to listen, who are willing to have a conversation, who are willing to email you back. Even being made redundant, I have made lots of great contacts with people in senior positions who are always willing to listen, to pass your details on, to help in any way that they can. And I think we should be mindful of that and always use our resources, email people, use LinkedIn as a point of contact to connect with other people, but most importantly to market yourselves and understand your value even at such a beginning point in your architectural journey, and continue to hold that value in whatever position and practice that you find yourself in. Thank you.
I am Maria Widner, founder of Real Estate Women. We are a diversity group and working in the built environment. We have just launched, so thank you so much for inviting us for this event, because it's very inspiring, but it also is the start of what we want to be, a manifesto that will bring change in the built environment. And we have worked with several professionals in real estate, also architects, surveyors, to build a manifesto of things that we want to see changing in our industry. And we're asking companies and government bodies as well operating in this in our industry to commit some changes, because it's a lot of things are said, but we're looking now to really start a campaign for Black professionals in our industry. And we're asking companies and government bodies operating in the built environment to commit to change. And this change by making the built environment a more representative sector. And we want that through active recruitment and promotion of Black professionals, ensuring that all levels of the organization have a fair representation of Black employees, and educating and empowering people and training to enhance awareness. So we're asking companies and government as well to do mandatory unconscious bias training and monitoring of biases that will tackle the issues of Black people in our industry. And no confusion on what is considered racist comments or behaviors. We want people to really make sure that it's not a banter and it's not okay. We want as elevating the Black voices by creating a safe space for discussion and reporting as well. It's important that we understand, it's important for the other people working in this environment to understand what it is like to not be heard or to feel afraid of not voicing our anger or voicing what we've been through. Leading by example and managers as allies. We want industries leaders to do reverse mentoring from Black employees. And we want the senior managers to act as trustees or non-executive directors in organizations dealing with the issues of the Black community. And finally, we're asking those companies to build transparency. And building transparency for us is asking the employees, especially the Black employees, to self-declare and publish salary, bonus data divided by gender and ethnic group. And with this will be the ethnic pay gap. So we are launching this manifesto as of today as the Real Estate Women, and this manifesto is still open for debate. We have done a lot of work on that, but we're asking people to come to us and see and really try to do what we have been speaking so much. So even in our network, we'd like to have more Black speakers coming through and speaking as well, and also having more training delivered to our members that it's about unconscious bias. So this is what we're trying to do. So if you would like to get involved, please do. It's for all of us. Thank you.
Double clicked. Sorry, I clicked it and I thought it was working. Sorry, just wanting to touch and follow on something that John said, which I found interesting, because he remarked that anti-racist training should be the compliance baseline. I am a strong advocate for that. I think anti-racist training should be the minimum, and it should be in terms of all of our professionals, doctors, lawyers, scientists, architects, judges, teachers, in terms of really tackling systemic discrimination in our society. We need to have all of our professionals, our leaders, and our institutions fully aware and tackling issues of systemic discrimination. I certainly, in my own practice, am looking at challenging more aspects of systemic racism and discrimination via challenge of indirect discrimination and utilising the public sector equality function. What we need to look at is that employers as well should really not be afraid to utilise positive action which is lawful under the Equality Act. Look at statistics, look at setting goals. I think it's very important in terms of local authorities that they need to understand that when they're exercising public functions, not only do they have a duty not to discriminate, but the public sector equality duty that I referred to means they have a duty to promote equality and should really consider, as I mentioned before, use of positive action, which is completely lawful and means that you can promote equality in a far more effective manner. So it's a real call to arms and a call to allyship across the board in terms of what we can do. There's a lot of good intentions, but we really can do a lot more. And I really think our local authorities and our employers need to really get on board with all of those matters to make real, meaningful and effective change.
Hello, I'm Charlotte Sword from Foster and Partners, and I head up the Human Resources Department. I mean, basically, Foster and Partners have been on a journey over the last 3 years. As everyone knows, we're one of the largest practices. We have 1,500 people worldwide, 76 different nationalities, and we speak 68 languages. It's a very, very diverse place of something that we're incredibly proud of. When I joined here 7 years ago, one of the things that I was particularly curious about was we are quite diverse in terms of a nationality perspective, but you know, what does inclusivity look like, and why does that matter? Because we're absolutely passionate that it does. We're a global architectural practice. We know that we create diverse environments for diverse societies, and we know that this is particularly important to both our client base, and it's really important to us as a business and for what we stand in and what we design and how we design that. We knew that we needed to look inwards and support our colleagues on this journey, first by listening to them and then giving them a voice so they can champion diversity in the workplace for generations to come. And then the things that we did, or how we looked and how we addressed that, is we created that voice for them in terms of forums to cover all aspects of diversity and inclusion, and listen and feedback and create suggestions, but more importantly, act on that. The thing that we started to really look at was that systemic piece, and there's been a lot that we've talked about. So we engaged with external parties to have a look about whether there was any systemic bias, and then what that looked like within our practice, and fed back to our people. We benchmark ourselves, so starting with that data point was really, really important. It's an iterative process. And it's continuous. What we've found over the last 3 years is you have to continue. If you want to create that change, you must keep continuing that on that journey. Learning and development, the language, what's right to use, terminology that's right to use, that's not right to use, but bringing people together, celebrating diversity, celebrating that change, reporting, mentoring. We're passionate about it, and we are pledging that we will continue on our journeys, especially around apprenticeships, creating opportunities for all ranges of society to come along and engage in this incredible profession. We will continue to do things around our outreach, engaging with schools, inviting education establishments into the practice, as well as our partners going out and engaging with educational institutions. The other pledges that we're looking to do is look around pledging to make sure that behaviour and diversity and inclusion is in every step of our leadership and promotion programme, and committing to our people that this is top of our priority. So I'd just like to say that I'm really, really grateful for the opportunity of RIBA and this initiative and these charters, because I think that it's going to be really important for the future success of our profession.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you to all our panelists. It's really encouraging to see there's real commitment to change out there, and we look forward to receiving further updates on your work. I know we are slightly over time, but I hope you'll all agree that it's been worth the extra few minutes. And just before we close, I'd like to just take 30 seconds to make my own pledge, actually, in my role as brand and marketing lead at RIBA. So our purpose at RIBA is to support architects. But as a brand, we also use the services of other creative professionals, such as graphic designers, photographers, filmmakers and copywriters, to tell stories and to get our message out there in a compelling way. And going forward, I pledge to support a wider range of creative talent and to ensure that our suppliers are representative of the communities we're reaching out to. And in turn, I hope that this will help to ensure that RIBA becomes a more welcoming and inclusive organisation. And that brings us to the end of the event for today. Once again, I'd like to thank John for his really inspiring and moving talk, to thank our panelists, and to thank you, our audience, for joining in this important discussion. Thank you.